My daughter-in-law held up a $25,000 handbag and told a room full of people I wouldn't know real luxury if it bit me. I didn't say a word. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled, took a sip of my water, and went home. 3 weeks later, she was crying in a country club parking lot while a federal agent handed her a subpoena. Before I get into the details of that night, let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. I always enjoy seeing where this community is tuning in from. My name is Sharon. I am 67 years old. For 25 years, I worked as a lead investigator for the International Luxury Fashion Syndicate. I spent my life looking for the one crooked stitch, the wrong weight of a zipper, the chemical smell of cheap glue hiding under expensive perfume. In the world of counterfeits, the truth is never on the shiny surface. It is always hidden in the seams. I just never expected to have to apply that same scrutiny to my own family. It started last month. My son, David, invited me to a formal family dinner at his new house. Well, I say his house, but really, it was a showcase for his wife, Chloe. Everything about Chloe was loud. The oversized logos on her belts, the tinted sunglasses she wore indoors, the way she made sure everyone in the room knew exactly how much her shoes cost. I always wore plain, unbranded wool coats and simple leather bags. She thought that meant I was poor. I just knew that real wealth does not need to scream for attention. When I pulled up to their driveway that evening, the snow was just starting to stick to the ground. I could see the glow of their ridiculous imported chandeliers through the front windows. When David opened the door, he looked exhausted. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped. A stark contrast to the manic, high-pitched laughter echoing from the dining room where Chloe was holding court. She had invited some of David's most important business partners, people she desperately wanted to impress. I could tell right away that David was carrying a weight he could not afford. I saw the forced smile. I saw the way he immediately offered to take my coat just to have an excuse to step away from the noise for 10 seconds. He loved her, but she was bankrupting him. I brushed the melting snow off my plain black coat, handed it to my son, and stepped into the blinding light of the hallway. I did not know it yet, but this was the night the seams of their perfect life were going to completely unravel. I walked into the dining room, and the first thing that hit me was the noise. Chloe was standing at the head of the long oak table, holding a glass of champagne, holding court. She was laughing loudly at something one of David's business partners had just said. It was that sharp, high-pitched laugh she always used when she wanted to make sure everyone in the room was looking at her. She was wearing a silk blouse that was aggressively branded. The designer's initials were woven into every square inch of the fabric. It is a funny thing about the world of high fashion. The people who actually have money, the people who have possessed it for generations, they hide their wealth. They wear quiet clothes with perfect stitching. But people who are desperate to prove they belong, they wear billboards. Chloe was a walking billboard. She spotted me near the doorway, and her fake smile stretched just a little bit wider. She glided across the room, making sure her heels clicked loudly against the floorboards. She threw her arms around me for a brief, cold hug. I could smell her perfume. It was strong, heavy, masking the faint, metallic scent of cheap hairspray. She pulled back and looked me up and down. I was wearing the same style I have worn for decades. A simple, charcoal wool sweater, tailored slacks, and my old, unbranded leather handbag. I bought it from a small artisan in Milan 20 years ago. It was hand-stitched, the kind of leather that only gets softer and more beautiful with time, but it did not have a shiny logo stamped on the front. So to Chloe, it was garbage. "Mom," she said, raising her voice just enough so the guests standing near the wine rack would pause and listen. "You really should let me take you shopping sometime. That old sweater makes you look well, like you have completely given up." A few people in the room went perfectly quiet. I saw my son David close his eyes for a fraction of a second. A silent plea for peace. He looked terrified of what I might say. He should have known better. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my wardrobe. I did not get angry. I simply looked at her. I let my eyes rest on her for exactly 3 seconds. In my 25 years of investigating counterfeit goods, you learn to spot the flaws instantly. You do not even have to try. My eyes automatically caught the slight fraying on the edge of her heavily branded belt. I noticed the uneven gold plating on her earrings, the way the metal was already tarnishing near the clasp. She was draped in cheap imitations, standing in a house she could not afford, trying to make me feel small. "I am perfectly comfortable, Chloe," I said, my voice completely steady, completely devoid of any anger. "But thank you for the offer." She let out a small, triumphant sigh. She mistook my silence for surrender. She believed, with the same arrogant certainty that defined her entire life, that she had won the exchange. She turned back to her guests, practically glowing with the satisfaction of having put her mother-in-law in her place. I moved toward the edge of the room and watched. I watched the way David frantically refilled empty glasses, trying to keep the momentum going. I watched the way Chloe steered every conversation back to money. She talked about their upcoming vacation to the coast. She talked about the custom landscaping they were planning for the backyard, and Slashley and Ton Ador. She talked about everything except the dark circles under her husband's eyes. I stood by the window and quietly analyzed the room. The floral centerpieces were expensive, likely ordered rushed from a high-end florist. But the wine glasses they were drinking from were mass-produced, factory-molded glass, pretending to be crystal. The seams on the stems were visible if you knew how to look. The whole house was like that. A thin layer of extreme luxury stretched over a foundation that was completely hollow. David finally walked over to me. He handed me a glass of sparkling water. His hand was trembling just a little bit. He asked me how my drive was. Making desperate small talk to cover up the tension, I looked at my boy. The boy I raised to be honest and hardworking. And I realized he was drowning. He was trapped in a counterfeit life, and the bill was coming due. I just did not realize how soon that bill was going to arrive, or what it was going to look like. The real show had not even started yet. The main event was sitting in a velvet box in the other room, waiting to be unveiled. I should have known exactly what this night was going to be the moment the invitation came. It happened 3 weeks before the dinner. I was in my garden, pruning the rose bushes. When my phone rang, it was not David. It was Chloe. That was the first red flag. In the 5 years they had been married, Chloe had never called me just to talk. Whenever my phone lit up with her name, it meant she needed an audience for something. Her voice through the speaker was sickeningly sweet. She told me they were hosting an intimate dinner party for a few of David's new associates, and she just absolutely had to have me there. She said it would mean the world to David. She said they were celebrating a big milestone. She did not say what the milestone was, and I did not ask. I just listened to the slight breathless quality in her voice. The kind of manufactured excitement you hear from a salesperson trying to push a bad deal before you can read the contract. I told her I would be there. I hung up the phone and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was being brought in as a prop. I just did not know what kind of play she was putting on. Now, sitting at her massive dining table. The play was in full swing. The table itself was a massive slab of reclaimed wood. It looked like it cost a fortune. but when I ran my hand underneath the edge, I felt the cheap particle board backing. It was a veneer. A very good veneer. But a fake nonetheless. Chloe had seated herself at the absolute center of the table, flanked by two men in very expensive very tailored suits. I learned their names during the introductions. One was a commercial real estate developer. The other was a private equity investor. These were men who dealt in millions. These were men David desperately needed to secure funding for his struggling logistics company. I was seated at the far end of the table, next to the kitchen door. The draft from the hallway kept hitting my shoulders. It was a calculated placement, close enough to be introduced as the loving mother, far enough away so my unbranded clothes and quiet demeanor would not ruin the aesthetic of her high society performance. Dinner was served by a private catering team. Two young men in crisp white shirts moving silently around the room, but Chloe did not introduce them as caterers. She waved her hand over the roasted lamb and the truffle risotto and smiled at the investor to her left. She told him she had been preparing the menu for days. She talked about sourcing the truffles. She talked about the exact temperature needed to get the lamb just right. I took a bite of the risotto. It was good, but it was not homemade. The flavor profile had the distinct, heavy-handed use of commercial truffle oil, not fresh shavings. It was a shortcut, another counterfeit. I looked at David. He was staring down at his plate. He knew she was lying. He knew the catering bill was currently sitting on a credit card that was already maxed out, but he said nothing. He just took another large gulp of his wine and nodded along as his wife spun a web of absolute fiction. The conversation around the table was dizzying. It was a constant stream of name-dropping and vacation planning. Chloe talked about a trip to the Amalfi Coast as if they owned property there. She complained about the wait times for private jet charters. She leaned in close to the real estate developer and whispered conspiratorially about how hard it was to find good domestic help these days. I did not say a word. I did not need to. My entire career was built on sitting in quiet rooms and listening to people lie about who they were and what they had. When you investigate international fraud, you learn that the biggest liars are usually the ones talking the loudest. They fill the silence with noise because they are terrified of what you might hear if things get quiet. I watched her hand as she reached for her wineglass. She was wearing a new ring, a massive, glittering stone surrounded by smaller diamonds. It caught the light from the cheap chandeliers and scattered it across the table. The investor complimented it. Chloe practically beamed. She told him it was an early anniversary present from David. She said it was custom designed by a jeweler in Paris. I looked at the ring, from 10 feet away, in the dim lighting. It was impressive, but I did not look at the stone. I looked at the setting. I looked at the prongs holding the stone in place. They were thick. They were clunky. A master jeweler in Paris would never obscure a high-clarity diamond with such heavy, clumsy metalwork. You only use heavy prongs when you need to hide the flawed edges of a synthetic stone. It was a cubic zirconia, a very large, very expensive piece of glass, set in a band that was probably turning her finger green underneath. I looked from the fake ring to my son. His face was pale. The forced smile he had been wearing all night was starting to crack at the edges. He looked like a man standing on a sheet of ice, listening to it splinter under his boots. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second from across the table. There was a desperate, silent apology in his expression. He was trapped. He had built his entire marriage on a foundation of debt and deception. And his wife was currently busy adding another floor to a house that was already collapsing. I took a sip of my water. I placed my glass down gently on the veneer table. The night was only half over, and the real performance had not even started yet. The plates were finally cleared away by the silent catering staff, and Chloe corralled all of us into the living room. It was a massive space with a vaulted ceiling and a stone fireplace. but it did not feel like a home. It felt like a waiting room at a very expensive, very cold clinic. The couches were stark white, the kind of furniture you are terrified to actually sit on. Everything was sharp angles and glass. There was not a single framed family photograph anywhere to be seen. Just oversized, generic modern art that looked like it had been bought in bulk to match the rugs. While the guests were finding their places, I slipped away toward the kitchen. I needed a moment away from the suffocating smell of Chloe's perfume and the relentless sound of her bragging. I pushed open the swinging door and found my son. David was standing by the stainless steel sink, his hands gripping the edge of the counter so tightly, his knuckles were completely white. He had his eyes closed. He was breathing heavily, almost panting, like a man who had just run a marathon and realized he still had miles left to go. I stood in the doorway for a long time. I did not say anything at first. I just watched my boy break down in the safety of an empty kitchen. I walked over and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. He jumped, startled, and then quickly wiped his face, pasting that same exhausted, fake smile back on. He told me he was just getting some more ice. He told me everything was fine. I looked at the frayed edge of his shirt cuff. It was a good shirt, but it was at least 5 years old. It had been washed and ironed so many times the fabric was starting to give out. His suit jacket, draped over a kitchen chair, was from an old collection. He was wearing clothes he had bought before he married Chloe. He was putting every single dollar he made, and thousands of dollars he did not actually have, into keeping up the illusion of his wife's lifestyle. I asked him how the logistics business was really doing. I kept my voice low, gentle. He looked away from me. He stared out the dark window into the snowy backyard and told me they were just going through a rough patch. Supply chain issues, he said. Increased fuel costs. He said securing this new round of funding from the private equity investor in the living room was critical. If this dinner went well, they would be saved. I squeezed his shoulder. I wanted to tell him that people who actually have money to invest do not care about the brand of your champagne. They care about your profit margins. They care about your character. And right now, his character was being overshadowed by a wife who was treating him like an ATM that was refusing to dispense cash. But I did not say it. He was already too fragile. I just told him I loved him. And we walked back out into the lion's den together. Back in the living room. Chloe had positioned herself perfectly in front of the roaring fire. She was holding a snifter of brandy, laughing at a joke the real estate developer had made. She looked up as David and I walked in, and her eyes immediately narrowed. She did not like David being away from her side. She did not like him talking to me alone. I think, deep down, she knew that I could see right through the cheap veneer of her entire existence. And she was terrified. I would open his eyes to it, too. She quickly changed the subject, projecting her voice so it commanded the attention of the entire room. She announced that tonight was not just about business. It was a celebration. She looked at David, flashing a perfectly practiced, completely hollow smile. She said she wanted to celebrate how incredibly hard her husband had been working. And she wanted to share a very special milestone with their dearest friends. She snapped her fingers at one of the young catering boys. It was a sharp, disrespectful sound. The boy scurried out to the hallway and came back a moment later holding a large, dark green velvet box. He carried it with both hands, as if it weighed 100 pounds, and placed it carefully in the exact center of the glass coffee table. The room went quiet. Everyone leaned in slightly. That is the thing about high society, or people pretending to be in it. They are addicted to the spectacle of consumption. They want to see what you bought, so they can figure out if they need to be jealous of you or if they can pity you. Chloe stepped forward and placed her hand on top of the velvet box. She looked directly at me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated arrogance. It was a challenge. She was about to unveil her masterpiece, the ultimate proof that she was better than me, richer than me, more sophisticated than me. But as I stood by the edge of the room, my eyes did not look at Chloe. My eyes locked onto the box on the table. Even from 10 feet away, my training kicked in automatically. I noticed the way the light hit the green fabric. Real silk velvet absorbs light, giving it a deep, rich shadow. This box was reflecting the firelight just a little too harshly. It was a synthetic blend, and the gold lettering stamped on the top, the logo of one of the most exclusive fashion houses in the world. The kerning was off. The space between the letters was fractionally too wide. The box had not even been opened yet, and I already knew a lie was sitting on that table. I just took a slow sip of my water, perfectly calm, and waited for her to spring her own trap. Chloe let her fingers linger on the edge of the dark green lid. She was dragging out the moment, soaking in the complete, breathless silence of the room. Every eye was locked on that table. The commercial real estate developer had even put his glass of brandy down. When she finally lifted the lid, she did not just open a box. She unveiled an idol. She pulled back layers of crisp, branded tissue paper and lifted the handbag out with both hands, presenting it to the room. It was an emerald green piece, with heavy gold-toned hardware and a massive, iconic logo stamped dead center. The guests actually murmured. It was the exact reaction she had paid for. She held it up by the top handle, turning it slowly, so the light from the roaring fire would catch the metal lock. She immediately started spinning her story. Her voice was loud, vibrating with a desperate kind of pride. She told the room that this specific model was a limited edition, completely unavailable to the general public. She said you could not just walk into a boutique and buy it. No matter how much money you had in your bank account, you had to be invited to purchase it. She told a detailed, incredibly elaborate story about a personal shopper in Milan who had to call in massive favors with a regional creative director just to secure this one specific bag for her. She made it sound like she had been granted an audience with royalty. I looked over at David. He was staring intensely at the floor. He knew the financial truth. He knew she had not used a personal shopper in Milan. And he knew she had somehow drained $25,000 from their available credit to get it. I could see his jaw clenching. I could see the exact moment his spirit broke a little further, standing in his own living room, watching his wife lie to the very men whose investment he desperately needed to save his company. But while David was looking at the floor, I was looking at the bag. I did not need a magnifying glass. I did not need to run my thumb along the seams or check the serial number on the interior tag. After 25 years of hunting down the most sophisticated counterfeits on the planet, my brain processes the manufacturing flaws before I even consciously register them. It is an absolute reflex. First, it was the structural integrity. A genuine luxury handbag from that specific European fashion house is constructed with a stiff, masterfully treated leather that holds its shape with absolute, unyielding precision. The bag Chloe was holding, even from across the room, had a slight, almost imperceptible sag on the left side. It was top-heavy. The synthetic core, hidden between the layers of outer material, was already buckling slightly under the weight of the metal clasp. Then, there was the light. Real, full-grain leather absorbs ambient light, giving it a rich, multi-dimensional depth. The emerald green surface of Chloe's bag was reflecting the firelight in a harsh, flat glare. It was a high-grade polyurethane finish. It was plastic, a very expensive, very convincing piece of plastic. But plastic nonetheless. And the gold hardware, the lock, the buckles, the tiny metal feet on the bottom, to the untrained eye of a real estate developer, it looked brilliant. To me, it was screaming. Genuine hardware on a piece like that is heavily plated in real gold or solid brass, giving it a warm, subtle luster. The metal on Chloe's bag was aggressively yellow. It was a cheap zinc alloy, electroplated in a mass production factory. I knew that if she carried it in the rain just a dozen times, that shiny gold would start to chip away and reveal the dull, gray metal underneath. She was standing there, glowing with absolute pride, holding a beautifully constructed lie. It was a high-tier counterfeit, what my former colleagues in the syndicate used to call a AAA replica. They are made in underground factories, designed to fool 99% of the population. They usually sell for maybe $500 to $1,000 to people who want the status without the actual price tag. But looking at the desperation in David's eyes, I knew Chloe did not pay $500. I knew exactly the kind of network she had likely bought it from. They are syndicates that do not sell their bags as fakes. They sell them as authentic, gray market goods to desperate, status-obsessed people, charging them the full retail price. Chloe had most likely paid $25,000 for a bag that cost maybe $80 to manufacture. She was completely oblivious to her own ruin. She walked the bag around the room, letting the guests admire it from a safe distance. She let the private equity investor inspect the shine of the lock. She laughed her high-pitched laugh and soaked in their compliments. She felt invincible. She felt like she had finally proven she belonged in this untouchable world of wealth and exclusivity. Then, she turned her eyes toward me. The admiration of the men in the room was not enough for her. She needed the submission of the one person she felt threatened by. She needed to rub it in my face. She needed to prove, once and for all, that her modern, flashy wealth was vastly superior to my quiet, outdated life. She started walking toward me. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. Measuring the distance between her fake triumph and my silent observation, she carried the bag in front of her like a weapon. I remained perfectly still by the kitchen door, my hands folded softly in front of me. I watched her approach, and I waited for her to make the biggest mistake of her life. She did not just walk toward me. She paraded. Every step was calculated to ensure the eyes of the private equity investor and the real estate developer were following her. She held the emerald green bag out in front of her, the harsh yellow glare of the cheap zinc hardware catching the light of the fireplace. I was standing near a small console table where I had placed my own handbag earlier in the evening. It was my old, unbranded leather tote, the one I bought in Milan 2 decades ago. It was soft, worn at the edges, completely devoid of any shiny metal logos. To a trained eye, the hand-stitched seams and the natural patina of the leather screamed quiet. Generational wealth, to clue. It was just an old, sad bag belonging to an old, sad woman. She stopped right in front of me. The heavy scent of her floral perfume washed over me, clashing terribly with the smell of the roasted lamb lingering in the air. I know it is a lot to take in. Sharon, Chloe said. Her voice was dripping with that toxic manufactured sweetness. She spoke loudly enough for the entire room to hear. The low hum of conversation from the men behind her died down completely. The trap was set, and she wanted an audience for the execution. It is a beautiful color, I said. My voice was perfectly flat. I did not give her the satisfaction of awe. and I did not give her the satisfaction of anger. Chloe let out a short, breathy laugh. She shifted her weight, holding the bag a little higher. She looked down at my worn leather tote on the table, and then back up at me. A smirk played at the corners of her mouth. "It is more than just a color. Mom," she said, practically dragging out the syllables. "It is an investment. It is a piece of art. But I suppose it is hard to appreciate something like this when you are used to carrying—" She gestured lazily toward my bag. "Whatever that is." I saw David flinch out of the corner of my eye. He took a step forward, his mouth opening to say something, anything, to stop his wife from digging this grave. But he froze. He was too terrified of making a scene in front of the men holding the purse strings to his failing company. He just stood there, paralyzed by his own debt. I did not look at David. I did not look at the men watching us. I looked directly at the emerald green bag, inches from my face, up close. The flaws were not just visible, they were practically screaming at me. In the world of high-end luxury authentication, we do not look at the broad strokes. We look at the microscopic details. I looked at the stitching along the top flap. Genuine bags of this caliber are saddle-stitched by hand. The thread sits on a slight diagonal, each stitch pulling with a unique human tension. The stitching on Chloe's bag was perfectly, rigidly straight. It was done by an industrial sewing machine in a factory that churns out thousands of these a day. I let my eyes drop to the heat stamp, the brand's name embossed in gold foil just below the lock. The font was wrong. It was a minuscule error. Maybe 2 millimeters of extra space between the second and third letters. But to someone who spent 25 years hunting counterfeits, it was as obvious as a misspelled word on a billboard. I reached my hand out, very slowly, as if I were going to touch the gleaming yellow lock. Chloe pulled the bag back immediately. She actually took a half step backward, clutching the plastic leather to her chest. "Oh, don't touch the hardware, Sharon," she snapped. The fake sweetness was gone, replaced by a sharp, venomous condescension. "The oils from your skin can tarnish the finish. You really have to be careful with pieces like this. But I suppose you wouldn't know about that. You have never held a piece of real luxury in your entire life. Have you?" The silence in the living room was absolute. You could hear the firewood cracking in the hearth. It was the kind of public humiliation that is designed to break a person. She had just told a room full of millionaires that her mother-in-law was a worthless, uncultured peasant. She stood there, breathing slightly heavy, waiting for me to crack. She wanted me to cry. She wanted me to yell. She wanted me to get defensive so she could play the victim and tell David I was ruining her special night. I did not do any of those things. I simply lowered my hand and folded it over my other one. I looked at the cheap, crooked stitching. I looked at the tarnishing fake gold. And then I looked into Chloe's eyes. I did not see a wealthy socialite. I saw a terrified deponess, deeply insecure woman who had just signed a $25,000 death warrant for a piece of garbage that was not worth the synthetic velvet box. It came in. I let the silence stretch for exactly 5 seconds. The absolute, undeniable weight of that silence pressed down on the room. And then I smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile. "You are absolutely right, Chloe," I said softly. "I have never seen anything quite like it." The relief that washed over her face was instantaneous. She exhaled a long breath, her shoulders dropping. She mistook my calm agreement for complete submission. She thought she had won. She believed, with every fiber of her hollow existence, that she had successfully established her dominance and put me in my place forever. She turned her back to me, floating back toward her wealthy guests to soak up the rest of their hollow compliments. She had no idea that the timer had just started ticking. The relief that washed over Chloe's face was instantaneous. It was almost comical how quickly her posture changed. She exhaled a long, dramatic breath, her shoulders dropping an inch. She mistook my calm agreement for complete, absolute submission. She thought I was intimidated. She believed, with the same arrogant certainty that defined her entire life, that she had successfully established her dominance and put me in my place forever. She turned her back to me, floating back toward her wealthy guests to soak up the rest of their hollow compliments. I just stood by the console table and watched her go. I did not say another word. I did not ruin her night. I let her have it. In my 25 years of interrogating smugglers and unmasking counterfeit rings, I learned a very valuable lesson. Never interrupt a liar when they are busy building their own trap. If you challenge them too early, they get defensive. They hide their tracks. But if you smile, if you nod, if you let them believe they are the smartest person in the room, they will eventually hand you the exact rope you need to hang them. Chloe spent the next 2 hours doing exactly that. She placed the emerald green bag on a prominent side table in the living room, right under a reading lamp. As if it were a museum exhibit, every time a guest walked past it, she found a way to bring it up again. She talked about the craftsmanship. She talked about the exclusivity. She even claimed she could smell the difference in the Italian leather, completely ignoring the faint, undeniable chemical odor of industrial glue that was slowly warming up under the heat of the lamp. The two investors nodded politely. Humoring her. They did not care about the bag. They cared about the fact that David was sweating through his suit, pouring them more brandy, desperately trying to steer the conversation back to logistics and supply chain funding. But Chloe would not let him. Every time David tried to bring up profit margins or expansion plans, Chloe would loudly interrupt with a story about a luxury resort they were supposedly looking at for the summer. She was systematically dismantling her husband's credibility in front of the very men he needed to survive. And she was doing it all to protect an image that was built on a piece of plastic. When dessert was finally served, I barely touched mine. It was a mass-produced cheesecake, plated to look expensive with a drizzle of cheap raspberry syrup. I just drank my sparkling water and waited for a polite amount of time to pass. I did not want to storm out. I did not want to give Chloe the satisfaction of thinking she had run me off. I just wanted to leave quietly. On my own terms, right around 10 o'clock, I stood up and walked over to my son. I placed a hand on his arm. His muscles were completely tense, coiled like a spring that was about to snap. It is getting late. David, I said softly. I should be heading home before the snow gets any worse. Chloe practically jumped up from the sofa. She was thrilled I was leaving. She walked over, flashing that toxic, manufactured smile one last time. She thanked me for coming, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. She told me to drive safe in my old car, making sure to emphasize the word old so the private equity investor would hear it. I just smiled back. A genuine, warm smile. I told her it was a night I would never forget. She had no idea how true that statement was. David walked me to the front door. The hallway was cold, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the living room. He opened the closet and handed me my plain black wool coat. He did not look me in the eye. He stared at the floor tiles. I am sorry about tonight. Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking just a little bit. She gets excited. It has been a stressful month for the business. She just wanted to celebrate. I looked at my boy. He was lying to me. And he was lying to himself. He was drowning in debt, suffocating under the weight of a $25,000 credit card charge for a fake bag. And he was still trying to protect her. I reached out and adjusted the collar of his frayed shirt. "You do not have to apologize for anything, David," I told him. "Just take care of yourself." I stepped out into the freezing night air. The snow was falling heavier now, blanketing the driveway, covering up the perfectly manicured lawn they could not afford to maintain. I walked to my car, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and turned on the engine. I sat there in the dark for a long time, watching the harsh, blinding light spilling out from their oversized windows. I could see Chloe's silhouette moving around the living room, still holding court, still living in her absolute delusion. She had humiliated me. She had mocked my clothes, my bag, my entire life. She thought she had won a war. I did not even know we were fighting. But as I put the car in drive and pulled out of their driveway, I felt a deep, profound sense of calm. I knew exactly what that emerald green bag was. I knew the specific factory flaws. I knew the synthetic material, and more importantly, I knew the exact underground syndicate that specialized in selling those specific high-tier fakes to desperate, status-obsessed fools for full retail price. Chloe thought she was untouchable. She thought her little secret was safe. She had absolutely no idea that she had just proudly displayed a piece of criminal evidence in front of one of the top counterfeit investigators in the country. I drove through the quiet, snowy streets toward my small, warm house. I did not turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the engine and mentally composed the phone call I was going to make the very next morning. The dinner party was over. The investigation had just begun. I woke up at 6 o'clock the next morning. The snow had stopped falling overnight, leaving my backyard buried under a thick, pristine blanket of white. It was incredibly quiet, the kind of absolute, heavy silence you only get in the early hours of a deep winter morning. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the suffocating 21 manufactured noise of Chloe's dining room the night before. I did not rush. I went into my small kitchen. I ground my own coffee beans. I listened to the water boil. I took my time. In my line of work, you learn very quickly that reacting on emotion is how you lose your leverage. You never make a move when you are angry. You wait until you are perfectly, coldly rational. At exactly 7 o'clock, I picked up my phone. I dialed a number I had not used in nearly 2 years. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, raspy voice answered. "Sharon," Marcus said. His voice was thick with sleep. "It is 7 in the morning. Please tell me someone is dead, or you are coming out of retirement." I smiled, staring out at the snow. Marcus was the lead forensic investigator for the International Luxury Fashion Syndicate. We had worked together for over a decade. He was the man who tracked the digital money. While I tracked the physical goods, he could trace a fraudulent wire transfer through 6 different offshore shell companies in his sleep. We had dismantled some of the largest counterfeit rings in Europe together. "I am definitely not coming out of retirement, Marcus," I said, taking a sip of my dark coffee. "But I do have a puzzle for you. I need you to run a profile for me." I could hear him shifting on the other end of the line. The rustle of sheets as he sat up. The sleep was instantly gone from his voice. He was all business. "Give me the details." I did not tell him it was my daughter-in-law. I kept it entirely professional. I told him about the emerald green bag. I described the exact shade of the leather, the way it failed to absorb the ambient light. I told him about the rigid, perfect machine stitching trying to pass off as hand-saddled thread. I described the slight structural sag on the left side, the undeniable signature of a synthetic polyurethane core buckling under the weight of the heavy hardware. And then I told him about the lock, the aggressively yellow, zinc alloy metal that had been cheaply electroplated to mimic solid brass, and the 2 millimeters of extra space in the gold foil heat stamp. Marcus let out a low, slow whistle. That is a high-tier fake, Sharon. A AAA replica. You don't see those being sold out of car trunks at flea markets. I know, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. The buyer claimed it was a limited edition. She claimed she used a personal shopper in Milan to bypass the boutique wait lists. She paid $25,000 for it. There was a long, heavy pause on the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was deadly serious. $25,000? Sharon. Nobody pays full retail for a fake unless they are actively being conned by a gray market syndicate. If they dropped that kind of money, they didn't just buy a bad bag. They got targeted, they got robbed. That is exactly what I was thinking. I replied, it fits the profile of the Vanguard operation, doesn't it? Vanguard. It was a name that had been floating around the syndicate during my last year before retirement. They were not just a sweatshop in an alleyway. They were a highly sophisticated, international fraud ring. They did not sell to average tourists. They targeted insecure WWW, aspiring socialites, people who had just enough money to be dangerous, but not enough actual status or connections to access the real luxury waiting lists. Vanguard would set up fake private shopping concierges online. They would use stolen marketing materials, forge certificates of authenticity, and even clone RFID tracking chips. They made their victims feel special, esclusivi, chosen, and then they drained their bank accounts, sending them pieces of plastic in synthetic velvet boxes. It sounds exactly like Vanguard. Marcus confirmed. They have been pushing emerald greens and rare leathers heavily this season. We have been trying to pin them down for months, but they keep rotating their shell companies and their bank accounts. We are actually working a joint task force with federal agents right now, trying to subpoena their central client ledgers. I looked out my kitchen window as the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, hitting the snow with a blinding glare. If someone bought a bag from them recently, a $25,000 transaction, would their name be in those ledgers? Absolutely, Marcus said. If we raid their fulfillment center, we get the shipping manifests. Anyone who wired them that kind of money isn't just a customer anymore. In a federal fraud investigation, they become a material witness. Their financial assets can be temporarily frozen. Their purchases confiscated as legal evidence. It is an absolute nightmare for the buyers. Why? Do you know the buyer? I took a slow, deep breath. I thought about David. I thought about the frayed cuffs of his old shirt, the utter exhaustion in his eyes, the absolute desperation of a man trying to keep his company afloat while his wife drowned them both in her vanity. I thought about the way Chloe had humiliated me in front of those investors, proudly displaying the very anchor that was sinking my son's life. She wanted to play in the big leagues. She wanted the ultimate status. Well, she was about to get the full, unvarnished reality of the luxury world she was so desperate to conquer. Yes, Marcus, I said softly, I know the buyer very well. I just need to get you the exact serial number she has stamped inside that bag so you can cross-reference it with the Vanguard shipments. Can you get close enough to it without raising her suspicion? He asked. I won't have to, I replied. She is so proud of it. She will practically hand it to me. I thanked Marcus. hung up the phone, and finished my coffee in the quiet warmth of my kitchen. The investigation was officially open. I did not need to yell. I did not need to argue. I just needed to let Chloe's own arrogance do all the heavy lifting. I did not have to wait long for the proof I needed. I did not have to hire a private investigator or sneak into her house to inspect the bag. As I said before, arrogance always does the heavy lifting for you. Around 10 o'clock that morning, I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I rarely used social media, but I kept an account just to see pictures of my son from time to time. I knew Chloe lived on her phone. Her entire self-worth was tied to the number of digital hearts floating across her screen. I typed in her name and went to her page. It was exactly what I expected. She had uploaded a relentless stream of content from the night before. There were photos of the dinner table, angled carefully to hide the cheap catering trays. There were pictures of her posing with the private equity investor, making sure her fake diamond ring was highly visible. And then, there was the main event. She had posted a 15-minute video dedicated entirely to the emerald green bag. She called it an unboxing and review. I clicked play and watched her spin her web of absolute delusion to her followers. She talked about the texture of the leather. She talked about the exclusive waitlist. She bragged about dropping $25,000 like it was pocket change. But then she did something that made me smile at my screen. She started addressing her haters. Apparently, a few people in her comments had questioned how she managed to get a bag that rare. Chloe got defensive. She got angry. And in her desperation to prove she was better than everyone else, she made a fatal mistake. She picked up the bag, opened it wide, and shoved her phone camera right inside. She wanted to show off the authenticity card and the serial number heat-stamped into the inner pocket. She held the camera perfectly still for 3 whole seconds, letting the gold lettering come into sharp focus. I hit pause. I took a screenshot of the serial number. I took another screenshot of the so-called certificate of authenticity, which had a holographic sticker that looked like it belonged on a child's toy, not a luxury good. I attached the images to an encrypted email and sent them directly to Marcus at the syndicate. I did not write a long message. I just wrote one sentence: run these numbers against the Vanguard ledger. I closed my laptop and went about my day. I cleaned the house. I repotted a few orchids in the sunroom. I kept my hands busy. In the world of investigation, the waiting is always the hardest part. You have set the hook, but you cannot pull the line until you know the fish has completely swallowed it. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Marcus. "You hit the jackpot, Sharon," he said. His voice was entirely professional now. The sharp, focused tone of a man looking at hard evidence. "I ran the serial number through the database we seized from a Vanguard shell company in Cyprus last week. It is a direct match." "I knew it," I said softly, looking out at the snow melting on my driveway. "It gets worse," Marcus continued. "Vanguard isn't just selling fake bags anymore. They are using these high-ticket sales to launder money across international borders. They set up fake consulting firms. When a buyer like your target pays $25,000 for a bag, they aren't paying a fashion boutique. They are wiring money directly into a known money laundering syndicate. The feds are furious." I stopped wiping the kitchen counter. "What does that mean for the buyers?" "It means they aren't just getting a cease and desist letter," Marcus explained. "The FBI is building a massive asset forfeiture case. Anyone who wired more than $10,000 to these specific accounts is being flagged as a material witness in a federal fraud investigation. Warrants are being signed this week. They are going to freeze the bank accounts used to make the purchases. And they are confiscating the physical goods as evidence. It is going to be a bloodbath for these fake socialites." I stood perfectly still in my kitchen. The weight of what he was saying settled over me. Chloe had not just bought a fake bag. She had wired $25,000 into an international criminal enterprise, and because of the federal investigation, whatever bank account she used was about to be locked down by the United States government. Sharon, Marcus said, his voice dropping a little lower. I saw the name on the shipping manifest. Chloe Prescott. That is your son's last name. Is this family? She is my daughter-in-law. I replied. My voice did not shake. There was a long silence on the line. Marcus and I had worked together for a long time. He knew I did not play games. Listen to me, Marcus said gently. I am one of the lead investigators on this joint task force. If you want me to, I can quietly pull her name off the primary target list. I can't save the bag. It is documented evidence, but I can bury the financial flag. I can keep her bank accounts from getting frozen. It is a professional courtesy. Sharon, just say the word. It was a lifeline. A massive, illegal, incredibly generous lifeline handed to me by an old friend. All I had to do was say yes. And Chloe would be spared the absolute destruction heading her way. I closed my eyes. I pictured the dining room from the night before. I pictured Chloe standing in front of the fireplace, holding that plastic green bag, looking down her nose at me. I heard her voice, loud and clear, echoing in my mind. You have never held a piece of real luxury in your entire life. Have you? And then I pictured David. I pictured his exhausted eyes, the frayed cuffs of his shirt, the sheer terror on his face as he watched his wife spend money. He did not have to impress men who did not care. If I saved her now, she would never learn. She would keep dragging my son down until there was absolutely nothing left of him. Sometimes, the only way to save a drowning man is to let the anchor hit the bottom. No. Marcus, I said. My voice was as cold and clear as the winter air outside. Do not pull her name. Do not change a single thing. Let the system work exactly the way it is supposed to. Marcus let out a heavy breath. Understood. The warrants go out next week. I will keep you posted. I hung up the phone. The trap was locked. The federal government was now quietly building a cage around Chloe's perfect, fake life. All I had to do was sit back and wait for the walls to close in. But I did not realize that the collateral damage was going to arrive at my front door much sooner than the FBI. 2 days passed. The kind of quiet, agonizing days where you know a bomb has been dropped. But you are just waiting for the shockwave to hit the windows. I did not call David. I did not check Chloe's social media. I just tended to my garden, read my books, and let the federal government do what it does best: build an inescapable cage. On Thursday evening, the storm finally reached my front porch. It was raining. A cold, miserable winter rain that had washed away all the pristine snow from earlier in the week. I was sitting in my living room, reading by the fire, when I heard a heavy knock at the door. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 9. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and went to the hallway. When I opened the door, my heart actually dropped. It was David. He was not wearing his tailored suit from the dinner party. He was wearing an old, faded college sweatshirt and a rain jacket that looked completely soaked through. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week. David, I said, stepping aside. Come in. You are freezing. He stepped into the warm glow of my hallway. He did not take off his jacket. He just stood there, staring at the floorboards as the dirty rainwater dripped from his shoes, staining the wood. He looked utterly broken. Chloe doesn't know I am here. he whispered. His voice was hoarse. She thinks I am at the office going over the quarterlies. I led him into the kitchen. I made him a cup of hot black tea. Exactly the way he liked it when he was a little boy. He wrapped both of his trembling hands around the ceramic mug, trying to siphon the heat into his bones. He took a sip, and then he finally looked up at me. His eyes were red, lined with dark, heavy shadows. The investors passed. "Mom," he said. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "The private equity guy from the dinner. He called me this morning. He said our margins were too thin. He said my personal debt ratio was a red flag. He backed out. I sat across from him. I did not act surprised. I am sorry. David." He shook his head. A pathetic, helpless movement. "It gets worse. I can't make payroll next week. My logistics company, everything I have built for the last 8 years, it is completely tapped out." He stopped talking. He stared into his tea. I knew there was more. When you interrogate suspects for a living, you know that the first confession is never the real one. The first confession is just the warm-up. They give you the manageable truth to avoid handing over the shameful one. I stayed perfectly quiet. I just waited. A tear spilled over his lower lid and ran down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily. It was the bag. He choked out. "That stupid green bag she showed off at the dinner." I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. "What about it?" "She didn't use our personal savings to buy it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We didn't have any personal savings left. She went into my home office while I was asleep. She found the banking token for the company. She used the business line of credit, $25,000. Mom, she wired $25,000 of operating capital to some private shopper in Europe to buy a piece of leather." He buried his face in his hands. He was sobbing now. The quiet, muffled sobs of a man who realizes he has let a parasite drain the life out of his entire world. He thought it was just a $25,000 piece of leather. He had absolutely no idea it was a piece of cheap plastic, and he had no idea she had wired that money directly into an international money laundering syndicate that was currently being targeted by the FBI. "I confronted her about it when I found out," he continued, keeping his face hidden in his hands. "She just yelled at me. She told me I didn't understand the value of networking. She said having that bag made her look like she belonged. And if she looked like she belonged, the investors would trust us. She actually believes she is helping the business by bankrupting it." He looked up at me, his face wet with tears. "And then?" he asked the question I knew was coming from the moment he knocked on my door. "I need a loan." "Mom," he pleaded, "just $30,000. Just enough to cover the payroll for my drivers and make the minimum payment on the credit line before the bank realizes what happened and freezes the accounts. I will pay you back. With interest. I promise. I can't lose my company because of her vanity." It was the most painful moment of my life. Sitting across from my only child, watching him beg for a lifeline. Every instinct I had as a mother screamed at me to go to my study, write the check, and make his pain go away. But I was not just a mother. I was an investigator. I knew exactly what would happen if I gave him that money. First, it would not save his company. The moment the FBI finalized their warrants next week, they were going to freeze any bank account connected to that Vanguard transaction. If I put $30,000 into his business account, the federal government would seize it as collateral evidence within a matter of days. My money would vanish into a legal black hole. Second, and more importantly, it would save Chloe. It would shield her from the consequences of her own horrific actions. She would learn that no matter how deep of a grave she dug for her husband, someone else would always step in to fill it with cash. She would never stop. She would bleed him completely dry until there was nothing left but a shell of a man. I looked at my son's desperate, pleading eyes. "No, David," I said softly. He blinked. He looked confused, as if he had not understood the word. "Mom, please, I am begging you. I will lose everything. I love you." "David," I told him, keeping my voice incredibly steady, incredibly calm. "But I will not write a check to fund your wife's delusions. If you use my money to patch this hole, she will just dig another one tomorrow. You have to let the consequences catch up to her." He stared at me. The desperation in his eyes slowly hardened into a bitter, cold resentment. He thought I was being cruel. He thought I was punishing him for marrying a woman I did not like. He didn't know I was standing between him and a federal indictment. He stood up abruptly. He didn't finish his tea. He didn't say goodbye. He just walked out of my kitchen, out the front door, and disappeared back into the freezing rain. I sat alone at my table, listening to his car engine fade away into the night. It broke my heart to let him leave like that. But sometimes, to save a sinking ship, you have to let the dead weight drag it to the bottom first. The morning after my son left my house in the freezing rain, the weather cleared up. The sky was a bright, piercing blue, completely devoid of clouds. It was the kind of cold, crisp winter day where everything feels sharp and clearly defined. That was exactly how I felt. My boundaries were set. The line was drawn. I knew David must have gone home and told Chloe the bad news. I knew he must have told her that his mother refused to hand over $30,000 to plug the massive hole she had blown in their finances. I expected her to call me. I expected her to scream, to demand, to try and manipulate me into changing my mind. But the phone never rang. Chloe did not operate in private. She needed an audience for her outrage. By noon, my phone started buzzing with text messages from a few of my older relatives and family friends. They were asking if everything was all right between me and David. They were sending me screenshots. I opened them and just shook my head. Chloe had taken to social media. She had not named me directly. Of course, that is the cowardice of passive-aggressive people. They throw stones and hide their hands. She had posted a long, dramatic block of text against a solid black background. She wrote about the pain of realizing that some family members want to see you fail. She wrote about how hard it is for young entrepreneurs to build a legacy when the older generation refuses to support their vision. She called herself a victim of toxic, unsupportive energy. She had just drained $25,000 from her husband's business account to buy a piece of plastic, pushed his company to the absolute brink of bankruptcy. And now she was playing the martyr on the internet for sympathy likes. I did not reply to any of her posts. I did not text my relatives to defend myself. I did not try to correct the narrative. When you know a federal indictment is coming, you do not waste your breath arguing with a fool on a screen. But Chloe did not just stop at playing the victim. She doubled down on her delusion. In her twisted mind, the reason the private equity investors backed out was not because David's margins were bad, and it certainly was not because she had humiliated him at the dinner party. She convinced herself that they just had not projected enough wealth. She believed that if she looked even more successful, if she carried herself with even more unassailable dominance, the money would somehow magically appear to save them. So, she weaponized the emerald green bag. For the next 4 days, that fake piece of polyurethane was practically glued to her arm. She took it everywhere. She posted pictures of it sitting on the table at expensive downtown bistros. She posted videos of herself walking through high-end boutiques, making sure the camera caught the reflection of the gold hardware in the mirrors. She was parading a piece of criminal evidence around the city, trying to manifest a financial miracle through sheer arrogance. I watched the videos from the quiet comfort of my living room, an investigator. It was fascinating to watch the bag begin to betray her, even if she was too blind to see it. Real luxury leather softens with use. It develops a rich, unique patina. It bends and molds to the way you carry it. But that bag was not leather. It was a synthetic core wrapped in a chemical coating. In the freezing winter air, the plastic began to stiffen. In one of the close-up photos she posted from a coffee shop, I could see the rigid, unnatural way the top flap was sitting. And the hardware, the aggressively yellow zinc alloy, she had been carrying it out in the snow, bringing it into warm, humid restaurants, and taking it back out into the freezing cold. Cheap electroplating cannot handle rapid temperature changes. If you zoomed in on the clasp in her latest video, you could see the absolute faintest hint of silver showing through on the bottom edge, where the fake gold was already starting to microfracture. It was falling apart, just like her life. On Tuesday afternoon, Marcus called me. "It is done, Sharon," he said. His voice was brisk, moving with the rapid pace of an active operation. The federal judge signed the asset forfeiture warrants this morning. The Vanguard ring is officially getting dismantled. I stood up and walked over to my front window, looking out at my quiet street. When does the freeze happen? The notices go out to the banking institutions first thing tomorrow. Marcus explained, any account that wired money to the Vanguard shell companies will be immediately frozen pending investigation. The account holders won't get a phone call. They won't get a warning. They will just go to swipe their card for a cup of coffee. And it will be completely and permanently defunct. I closed my eyes. The trap was springing shut. And the physical goods? I asked. The FBI is coordinating with local marshals. Marcus said, anyone who received a high-value item from the syndicate is going to get a visit. The goods are classified as material evidence in a federal money laundering case. They are going to confiscate the bags, the watches, all of it. They are issuing subpoenas for the buyers to testify about their purchasing channels. Thank you, Marcus, I said softly. Sharon. He paused. It is going to get very ugly for your son very quickly. Once those business accounts lock up, his payroll bounces. His vendors will drop him. Are you sure you are ready for the fallout? A foundation doesn't fail all at once. Marcus, I told him, using the same logic that had guided my entire career. It fails quietly, for years, until the day it simply can't hold anymore. This collapse was inevitable. I am just letting it happen on schedule. I hung up the phone. Tomorrow was Wednesday. Chloe had been loudly broadcasting her plans for Wednesday all week on her social media. She had secured an invitation to a highly exclusive charity brunch at the Oak Ridge Country Club. It was a gathering of the wealthiest, most influential women in the county. It was exactly the kind of room she had spent her entire marriage desperately trying to get into. She was planning to walk into that room with her emerald green bag, completely ready to cement her status as a titan of high society. She had absolutely no idea that she was walking directly into a federal buzzsaw. And this time, I was not going to sit at home and watch it on a screen. I was a member of the Oak Ridge Country Club. I had been for 20 years. I went to my closet, pulled out a simple, beautifully tailored charcoal suit, and prepared to watch the absolute destruction of her counterfeit kingdom. Wednesday morning arrived with a bitter, biting cold, but the sky was absolutely clear. I drove up the long, winding driveway of the Oak Ridge Country Club just before 10 o'clock. The club is an institution in our county. It is not a place of flashing neon signs or loud, aggressive branding. It is a place of deep, quiet, generational wealth. The kind of wealth that speaks in whispers, not screams. The drive is lined with ancient oak trees, and the clubhouse itself is a massive stone building covered in ivy. It is exactly the kind of environment where a fake plastic handbag would stand out like a siren in a library. I handed my keys to the valet and stepped inside. I was wearing a simple, beautifully tailored charcoal suit and a single strand of pearls my late husband had given me 30 years ago. I did not need to wear a billboard to prove I belonged there. The front desk staff greeted me by name. I had been a member for 2 decades. I bypassed the main dining hall and found a quiet corner table in the solarium. A bright, glass-walled room where the charity brunch was being held. I ordered a cup of Earl Grey tea, opened a small notebook, and waited for the show to begin. At 11:15, the room was mostly full of the county's most influential women. And then, Chloe arrived. She did not just walk into the room. She made an entrance. She was wearing a blindingly white winter coat that looked incredibly impractical and massive. Dark sunglasses that she did not take off, even after stepping indoors. And there, resting prominently in the crook of her arm, was the emerald green bag. She stood at the entrance for a moment, scanning the room, making sure enough people were looking at her before she moved. I watched her from my corner table, completely unnoticed. It was fascinating to observe her in the wild. She zeroed in on a group of 3 women standing near the mimosa station. These were the wives of the board of directors, women whose families had essentially founded the club. Chloe glided over to them, inserting herself into their conversation with a loud, shrill laugh that cut through the polite, hushed hum of the room. She immediately shifted her posture, making sure the harsh, yellow zinc lock of her bag was catching the sunlight pouring in through the glass ceiling. From across the room, in the uncompromising natural light of the solarium, the bag looked entirely tragic. The freezing temperatures outside and the dry heat inside had waged a war on the synthetic polyurethane core. The left side was sagging heavily now, completely losing its structural integrity. The cheap electroplated gold on the clasps looked dull, almost grayish in the bright sun. It was a dying piece of plastic, and she was carrying it like it was the Holy Grail. The women she was talking to were perfectly polite. That is the thing about true high society. They will never tell you that you are making a fool of yourself to your face. They just smile, nod, and mentally cross your name off every future guest list. I could see their eyes darting to the crooked stitching on her bag, to the oversized, tacky logo on her belt. They knew exactly what she was. But Chloe was completely blissfully oblivious. She was talking a mile a minute, gesturing wildly, completely convinced she was charming her way into the inner circle. After about 20 minutes of exhausting the board members, she finally turned around and started walking toward the buffet. That was when she spotted me. She froze for a fraction of a second. She clearly had not expected to see me there. In her mind, I was just a sad, poor old woman who lived in a small house and wore outdated clothes. Seeing me sitting comfortably in the most exclusive country club in the state did not compute with her manufactured reality. But she recovered quickly. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and marched straight toward my table. "Sharon," she said, her voice dropping into that familiar, toxic, condescending tone. "I am absolutely shocked to see you here. I didn't think they let non-members in without a guest pass." Did you win a ticket in a raffle? I looked up from my tea. I did not frown. I did not get defensive. I just smiled. A soft, polite smile. It is a lovely morning for a brunch. Chloe. I said simply, "How is David doing?" Her eyes flashed with a brief hit of annoyance at the mention of her husband, the man whose business she had just pushed off a financial cliff, but she quickly masked it with a fake, radiant grin. David is doing fantastically. She lied without a single ounce of hesitation. His business is practically booming. We are actually looking at upgrading our winter house. That is why networking at these events is so crucial. She placed her hand on the top flap of the fake green bag, stroking the stiff, freezing plastic as if it were a prized pet. You have to dress for the life you want. Sharon, she continued, her voice loud enough for the table next to us to hear. You have to project success. When people see pieces like this, they know they are dealing with a winner. They know we operate on a completely different level. She let out a long, triumphant sigh. She looked around the beautiful, sunlit room. And then she looked down at me. The absolute arrogance radiating from her was suffocating. She believed she had won. She believed she had successfully navigated her way to the top of the social ladder, leaving her bankrupt husband and her quiet mother-in-law in the dirt. She thought she was untouchable. Enjoy your tea. Mom, she said, offering a sickeningly sweet, entirely hollow smile. Try not to take too many of the free pastries home in your purse. She turned on her heel and walked away, practically floating on a cloud of her own delusion. I just watched her go. I took a slow sip of my Earl Grey. The warmth of the tea was comforting against the cold glass of the solarium. She had no idea that her bank accounts had been permanently frozen exactly 3 hours ago. She had no idea that if she tried to buy a single extra drink at the bar, her card would decline. And she had absolutely no idea that 2 federal marshals and an agent from the International Luxury Fashion Syndicate were currently pulling into the valet driveway. The false triumph was over. The reckoning had arrived. The shift in the room did not happen all at once. It started at the front entrance of the solarium and rippled backward like a cold breeze moving rapidly across a quiet lake. The polite, hushed hum of conversation began to drop, table by table, until the massive glass room was completely, uncomfortably silent. I looked up from my Earl Grey tea toward the heavy mahogany double doors. 3 men had just walked in. They were not wearing the pastel golf shirts or tailored tweed jackets you usually see at the Oak Ridge Country Club. 2 of them were wearing dark, functional suits with federal marshal badges clipped to their belts. The 3rd man was Marcus. He was wearing a sharp, dark gray suit, holding a heavy leather briefcase in his right hand. They did not look around the room with awe. They looked around with absolute, clinical purpose. Chloe was standing near the mimosa station, holding court with the board members' wives. She had her back to the doors, entirely oblivious to the sudden silence suffocating the room. She was laughing loudly, gesturing with her plastic green bag, completely lost in her own manufactured delusion. The woman standing across from her, a billionaire's wife who had been politely tolerating Chloe for the last 30 minutes, suddenly stopped smiling. Her eyes darted past Chloe's shoulder, focusing intensely on the 3 men marching across the room. High society has a very specific, deeply ingrained survival instinct. When legal trouble walks into a room, old money steps back. The 3 wealthy women smoothly, silently took 2 steps away from Chloe, leaving her standing completely alone on an invisible island. Chloe finally noticed the silence. She turned around, an annoyed expression crossing her face. Ready to scold whoever was interrupting her moment in the spotlight, her eyes landed on the two federal marshals standing exactly 3 feet away from her. "Excuse me," Chloe said. Her voice was sharp, dripping with that same toxic entitlement she used on waiters and catering staff. "This is a private charity event. If you are looking for the service entrance, it is around the back." The taller of the two marshals did not blink. He did not raise his voice. He did not react to her tone at all. He simply pulled a thick, manila envelope from his inner jacket pocket. "Chloe Prescott?" he asked. His voice was flat, carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of federal authority. Chloe stiffened. "Yes, I am Mrs. Prescott. Who are you? And who let you in here?" "Mom, we are with the United States Marshals Service, acting in coordination with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he said, holding the envelope out to her. "You are being served with a federal subpoena and a formal notice of asset forfeiture." Chloe did not take the envelope. She just stared at it, her hands still clutching the heavy yellow handle of her fake emerald bag. The blood started to drain from her face, leaving her thick, expensive foundation looking like a pale, crackling mask. "I don't understand," she stammered, her high-pitched confidence completely evaporating. "Asset forfeiture? For what? I haven't done anything. My husband owns a logistics company. You have the wrong person." That was when Marcus stepped forward. He looked at the emerald green bag resting in the crook of her arm. He looked at the sagging polyurethane core, the aggressively yellow zinc hardware, the rigidly perfect machine stitching, and then he looked her dead in the eye. "We definitely have the right person, Mrs. Prescott," Marcus said, his voice calm and incredibly precise. "3 weeks ago, you wired $25,000 from a commercial business account to an offshore shell company operating out of Cyprus. That company is a known front for the Vanguard International Money Laundering Syndicate. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has officially frozen all banking accounts associated with that transaction, effective at 9 o'clock this morning." Chloe's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The absolute terror was finally setting in. She looked wildly around the room, searching for the wealthy women she thought were her friends, hoping someone would step in and save her. They were looking at her with absolute disgust. In their world, you can be boring. You can be eccentric. But you absolutely cannot be a target of a federal fraud investigation. "Frozen?" Chloe finally choked out. "You froze our accounts? All of them?" "Every single one." Marcus confirmed, including the commercial credit lines. "But that is just the financial side." "Mrs. Prescott, I am here for the physical evidence." Marcus opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a pair of white cotton inspection gloves. He slipped them onto his hands. Moving with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned forensic investigator, he reached out and pointed directly at the bag she was clutching to her chest. "The item you are currently holding is classified as material evidence in a federal racketeering case," Marcus stated, speaking loudly enough for the entire solarium to hear. "It is not a limited edition. It is a high-tier polyurethane counterfeit purchased directly from a criminal enterprise. We are legally confiscating it right now." "No!" Chloe shrieked, pulling the bag away from him. It was a visceral, panicked reaction. She was losing her husband's money. She was losing her carefully crafted status. And now they were exposing her ultimate lie in front of the most powerful women in the county. "You can't take this. I bought it from a personal shopper in Milan. You are making a massive mistake." The taller marshal rested his hand on his utility belt. It was a subtle gesture, but the implication was absolute. "You do not argue with a federal warrant. "Ma'am," the marshal said, his voice dropping an octave. Completely devoid of any patience, hand over the evidence, or you will be placed in handcuffs for obstructing a federal investigation. Right here, right now. It is your choice. Chloe stood frozen in the center of the room. The absolute, unassailable dominance she had projected just 10 minutes earlier was completely shattered. She was not a queen of high society. She was a terrified, bankrupt woman caught in a trap she had built with her own two hands. Her breathing was ragged. Her eyes were darting rapidly, looking for an escape that did not exist. Slowly, her hands trembling so violently she could barely loosen her grip, she held the bag out. Marcus took it from her. He did not treat it like a luxury item. He dropped it unceremoniously into a heavy, clear plastic evidence bag, sealing it shut with a loud, tearing sound that echoed across the silent room. The plastic bag had a bright red evidence tag attached to the zipper inside that harsh plastic casing. Stripped of its glamorous context, the green bag looked exactly like what it was: garbage. I sat at my corner table, watching the entire exchange over the rim of my teacup. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not say a single word. I just watched the inevitable consequences of $25,000 worth of pure, unadulterated vanity crash down on her head. But the humiliation was not over yet. She had lost her money. She had lost her bag. She had lost every ounce of respect she had ever hoped to gain in this room. But she still did not know the worst part. She still did not know exactly who had opened the door and let the wolves inside. The heavy mahogany doors of the solarium swung shut behind Marcus and the two federal marshals. The solid, definitive thud echoed through the massive glass room. The red evidence tag attached to the clear plastic bag was the very last thing Chloe saw of her $25,000 investment. Then, the true horror of her situation began to unfold. In the criminal justice system, you have the right to an attorney. You have the right to a trial. In the world of high society, there is no trial. The verdict is instantaneous, and the execution is completely silent. Chloe turned slowly back toward the three board members' wives. She forced a smile. It was a grotesque, trembling imitation of her usual confident smirk. Her thick foundation looked like cracked porcelain under the unforgiving winter sunlight. "It is just a misunderstanding." Chloe stammered. Her voice pitched unnaturally high. She reached out, trying to touch the arm of the billionaire's wife she had been trying so desperately to impress just 10 minutes earlier. "David's logistics company. You know how it is. Sometimes the tax paperwork gets mixed up. They will clear it all up by this afternoon." The billionaire's wife did not step back this time. She simply looked down at Chloe's trembling hand, hovering in the air, and then looked directly into Chloe's eyes. Her expression was completely devoid of anger, pity, or even recognition. It was the look you give a stranger who has wandered into the wrong building. Without saying a single word, the woman turned her back. The other two women did the exact same thing. They seamlessly resumed their conversation about a charity gala in the spring, completely erasing Chloe from their circle. A waiter in a crisp white shirt stepped forward and quietly cleared away Chloe's half-empty mimosa glass from the cocktail table. She had been evicted, not from a house, but from the only world she ever cared about. Chloe stood there for a long moment, completely paralyzed. The entire room had gone back to their polite, hushed conversations. But the physical space around Chloe remained entirely empty. People were actively steering clear of her, treating her like she was carrying a highly contagious disease. She turned to leave. She did not have her confident, floating glide anymore. Her footsteps were heavy, erratic. She pulled her phone out of her white winter coat pocket, her thumbs flying across the screen as she frantically tried to open her banking app. I watched from my corner table as her shoulders suddenly slumped. She let out a small, strangled gasp. The app must have shown exactly what Marcus promised. Every single account she had access to, every commercial credit line, every joint savings account, was locked down and showing a balance of 0. She started walking toward the exit, completely broken, but right before she reached the mahogany doors, she stopped. She turned her head and looked across the room, directly at my corner table. I was still sitting there. I had not moved. I was holding my ceramic teacup, perfectly calm, perfectly untouched by the absolute hurricane that had just ripped through her life. She stared at me. Her panicked, racing mind was desperately trying to put the pieces together. She remembered how I had looked at the bag at the dinner party. She remembered the strange, calm smile I gave her when she insulted my clothes. She remembered that I was sitting right here, in the most exclusive club in the county, watching a federal task force dismantle her life with absolute precision. She did not walk out the door. She turned around and marched straight toward my table. When she reached me, she was shaking so violently, I could hear the fabric of her coat rustling. Her eyes were bloodshot. The toxic arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a wild, cornered desperation. "You?" she whispered. Her voice was raspy, choking on her own panic. You knew they were coming." I took a slow sip of my Earl Grey tea. I placed the cup gently on the saucer. The faint clink of the porcelain sounded incredibly loud between us. "I told you to be careful with the hardware." "Chloe," I said softly, "the oils from your skin can tarnish cheap zinc." I just forgot to mention the federal agents. Her eyes went wide. She braced both of her hands on the edge of my table, leaning in close. "How did you do this? How could you possibly know about the offshore accounts? You are just a retired old woman." I looked up at her. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I just let the absolute truth crush whatever was left of her delusion. I am a retired old woman. I agreed calmly. But before I retired, I spent 25 years working as a lead forensic investigator for the International Luxury Fashion Syndicate, the same syndicate that gentleman in the gray suit works for. Chloe stopped breathing. She literally stopped breathing. The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she was going to faint right there on the solarium floor. "When you shoved that bag in my face at the dinner party," I continued, keeping my voice incredibly steady, "I did not see a limited edition masterpiece. I saw a polyurethane core. I saw machine stitching. I saw 2 millimeters of extra space in the heat stamp. I spent my entire life hunting down the exact kind of garbage you paid $25,000 for." "No," she gasped, shaking her head in denial. "No." The personal shopper said. There was no personal shopper. "Chloe," I cut her off. "You wired my son's operating capital to an international money laundering ring, and then, because you could not help yourself, you proudly displayed the serial number on the internet for the whole world to see. I did not even have to look for the evidence. You practically handed it to me." She stared at me, the absolute, devastating reality finally sinking in. She had not just been caught. She had built her own trap, locked the door from the inside, and handed me the key. She had spent her entire marriage trying to prove she was smarter, richer, and better than me, only to realize she had been playing checkers while I owned the entire board. "You ruined us," she sobbed. tears finally spilling over her cracked makeup. "You froze David's accounts. You destroyed his company." "I did not destroy anything." I corrected her. "You stole $25,000 from a failing business to buy a piece of plastic. I just made sure the receipt was delivered to the right address. You wanted to play in the big leagues?" Cluey. Welcome to the big leagues. The consequences are real here. I picked up my small notebook and my leather handbag. I stood up from the table. I was done with my tea. And I was completely done with her. "If I were you," I told her, looking down at her trembling hands, "I would figure out how you are going to pay the valet, because your credit cards do not work anymore." I walked past her, leaving her standing alone in the bright, freezing sunlight of the solarium. I did not look back. I knew what was waiting for her outside these doors. And I knew what was waiting for David when he finally realized the true cost of his wife's vanity. The dominoes were falling, and there was absolutely nothing left to stop them. I drove away from the Oak Ridge Country Club in absolute silence. I did not turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the engine and felt the heater blowing warm air against my cold hands. I did not feel a sense of vicious joy. I did not feel the need to celebrate. I just felt the quiet, heavy relief of a job that was finally finished. I had cut the anchor before it could drag my son entirely under, but the blast radius of a federal asset freeze does not stop at the person who initiated the fraudulent wire transfer. It ripples outward, destroying everything attached to the financial source. I knew exactly where David was. It was early afternoon on a Wednesday. He was sitting in his glass-walled office at the logistics warehouse, completely oblivious to the hurricane that had just made landfall. He was likely staring at his accounting software, desperately trying to figure out how to cover his payroll by Friday afternoon with the limited credit he had left. And right around 2 o'clock, he would have clicked the refresh button on his banking portal. That is how it usually happens. There is no dramatic raid at a corporate office. There is no phone call warning you to get your affairs in order. It happens in total silence. You just get a red error message on a screen. Access denied. Please contact your financial institution. I was in my study, organizing some old photographs, when I heard the screech of tires in my driveway. It was nearly 4 o'clock. This time, there was no polite knock. The doorbell rang 3 times in rapid succession, followed by heavy, frantic pounding on the solid oak wood of my front door. I walked down the hallway and opened it. David was standing there on my porch. He had lost his coat somewhere. He was standing in the freezing winter wind in just his wrinkled dress shirt and slacks. His face was completely drained of color. His eyes were wide, darting around with a kind of sheer, primal panic I had not seen in him since he was a little boy who had lost his way in a crowded supermarket. "Mom," I gasped, pushing past me into the warm hallway before I could even invite him in. Something is wrong. Something is incredibly, horribly wrong. I closed the door, shutting out the cold wind. I did not ask him what happened. I already knew. I led him into the living room. I did not offer him a cup of tea this time. He was vibrating with too much frantic energy to sit down. He started pacing back and forth across my woven rug, his hands gripping his own hair. "The bank froze my accounts," he said, his voice cracking, edging on complete hysteria. "All of them. The company payroll account, the operating line of credit, the vendor payment portals, even my personal checking account. I can't even buy a gallon of gas to get my trucks out of the lot." He stopped pacing and looked at me, desperate for me to tell him it was just a technical glitch. "I called the local branch manager," he continued, speaking so fast the words were tripping over each other. "He wouldn't even talk to me. He transferred me directly to a legal compliance officer in New York. They told me there is a federal hold on my entire financial portfolio. They said it was connected to a suspicious international wire transfer flagged by the FBI. He threw his hands up in the air. It has to be a mistake. Mom, a hacker. Or a clerical error at the bank. I run a local trucking company in the Midwest. I do not do international wire transfers to offshore accounts. I have to hire a lawyer to fix this before my vendors cancel my contracts tomorrow morning. I stood perfectly still by the fireplace. I looked at my son. I looked at the frayed cuffs of his shirt. The absolute terror in his eyes. He was a good man who had worked his entire adult life to build something real. And he was currently standing in the wreckage of a bomb his wife had planted under his desk. You did not make the transfer, David. I told him. My voice was very gentle, but completely, unyieldingly firm. Chloe did. He blinked. He literally stumbled backward half a step. The confusion on his face was agonizing to watch. Chloe? He whispered. What are you talking about? She doesn't have access to the commercial routing numbers. She found your banking token. David. I reminded him quietly. You stood in my kitchen last week and told me that yourself. She wired $25,000 of your operating capital to what she thought was a personal shopper in Europe. He shook his head aggressively, trying to reject the reality of my words. Yes, but that was for a handbag. That was a retail purchase. The bank said this is a federal racketeering hold. They said the account the money went to is under investigation for money laundering. I took a slow breath. It was time to pull the final curtain back. David, I said, stepping closer to him, so he had to look me directly in the eye. She did not buy that bag from a luxury boutique. She bought a high-tier counterfeit. It was a piece of polyurethane plastic with cheap zinc hardware, and the people she wired your company's money to are an international criminal syndicate called Vanguard. The federal government has been tracking their offshore shell companies for months. I let that sink in for exactly 3 seconds before I delivered the rest of the truth. When Chloe sent them that $25,000, she did not just buy a fake bag. She legally funded a criminal enterprise. Ignorance is not a defense in a federal asset forfeiture case. That is why the FBI froze your accounts. And that is why a United States Marshal confiscated her bag at the Oak Ridge Country Club 2 hours ago. David stopped breathing. He stared at me. The absolute, devastating reality, finally crushing the last remaining breath of his denial. He realized that his wife had not just made a selfish financial decision. She had committed an act so recklessly arrogant that it had brought the full weight of the federal justice system down on his head. You knew, he whispered, his voice completely hollow. He looked at me, truly seeing the 25 years of investigative experience behind my eyes. You knew it was fake at the dinner party. You knew what she had done. I knew exactly what she had done. I confirmed calmly. And I let the system do exactly what it is designed to do. I told you, David, I will not write a check to fund her delusions. The only way to stop a parasite is to let it run completely out of blood. He did not yell. He did not argue with me. The anger he had felt toward me last week was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, horrifying clarity. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. His hand was perfectly steady now. The panic had burned away, leaving nothing but cold resolve. I have been calling her for an hour, David said quietly, staring at the blank screen of his phone. It goes straight to voicemail. She is hiding. She is entirely out of options. David, I told him, and so are you. The only question now is what you are going to do about it. David put his phone back into his pocket. His hands had finally stopped shaking. The frantic, Wild energy that had propelled him through my front door just 20 minutes ago was completely gone. It was replaced by a cold, heavy silence. It is the kind of silence that only falls over a person when they realize the life they have been fighting so desperately to save is already dead. "I have to go home," David said. His voice was completely flat, entirely devoid of emotion. "I have to pack my things. If I stay in that house with her tonight, I think I will lose my mind." I did not try to stop him. I did not offer him platitudes about working through their marriage. When a foundation is built on a sinkhole, you do not hand the homeowner a hammer and nails. You tell them to get out before the roof caves in. "I am coming with you," I told him. He nodded slowly. We walked out to the driveway. We took my car. His truck was running on fumes. And with every single bank account tied to his name, currently frozen by a federal warrant, he could not even afford a gallon of gas. I turned the heater on high, and we drove across town in absolute, unbroken silence. The winter sun was starting to set by the time we pulled into their neighborhood. The sky was a bruised, dark purple. When we reached their driveway, the house was blazing with light. Every single lamp, every overhead bulb, every ridiculous imported chandelier was turned on. It was a beacon of fake luxury. Burning electricity that my son could no longer legally pay for. David unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The moment we stepped into the massive, echoing hallway, the illusion of their perfect life was completely shattered. Chloe's blindingly white winter coat was thrown carelessly on the floor near the closet, covered in dirty, melting slush from the country club parking lot. One of her expensive heels was kicked off near the stairs, the other lying halfway down the hall. We heard frantic, heavy footsteps coming from the master bedroom upstairs. David walked up the stairs slowly. I followed a few steps behind him. He did not look like a broken man anymore. He looked like a man who was finally waking up from a very long, very exhausting nightmare. When we reached the doorway of the master bedroom, we found Chloe. She was a complete disaster. The flawless, manufactured socialite who had sneered at my unbranded clothes at the dinner party was completely gone. Her thick, expensive makeup was smeared across her cheeks, ruined by hours of panicked crying. She was dragging a massive, heavily branded leather suitcase out of her walk-in closet, her hands trembling violently as she tried to force the zipper open. She heard David's footsteps and spun around for a fraction of a second. Her eyes lit up with absolute relief. She did not see me standing in the shadows of the hallway yet. She only saw her husband, her eternal safety net, the man she had manipulated and bled dry for 5 years. She immediately snapped back into her favorite role. The victim. "David," she sobbed, rushing toward him. "Thank God you are home. Something insane is happening. The bank made a massive mistake. My cards declined at the valet. And my banking app is locked. We need to call a lawyer right now. Someone hacked our accounts." She reached out to grab his arms. But David took a deliberate step backward. The absolute, undeniable finality of that gesture stopped her dead in her tracks. He did not yell. He did not curse at her. He just looked at her. He looked at the branded silk blouse she was wearing. He looked at the massive, fake diamond ring on her finger. And then he looked at the empty space on her arm, where she usually carried the emerald green bag. "Where is the bag?" "Chloe?" David asked quietly. Chloe froze. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she was going to collapse onto the plush bedroom carpet. Her mouth opened and closed twice before she could force a sound out. The bag?" she stammered, her high-pitched voice cracking terribly. I lost it," Someone stole it at the club. But that doesn't matter right now. David, we need to fix the bank accounts. You didn't lose it, David said, his voice dropping into a cold, terrifying monotone. A United States Marshal confiscated it because it was not a limited edition masterpiece from a personal shopper. It was a cheap piece of plastic. And the $25,000 you stole from my operating capital was wired directly into an international money laundering syndicate. Chloe physically recoiled. She stumbled backward, bumping into the edge of the mattress. Her breathing became incredibly shallow, her chest heaving as the absolute reality of her situation closed in around her. She tried to pivot. She tried to spin a new web. David, listen to me. I didn't know. I thought they were legitimate. I was just trying to help us. I was trying to look the part so the investors would respect us. I did it for your company. You killed my company, David said softly. It was the most heartbreaking sound I had ever heard him make. The federal government froze every single asset I have because of your wire transfer. I cannot make payroll on Friday. I cannot pay my vendors. My drivers are going to lose their jobs, and I am going to lose the business. I spent 8 years building, and you did it all so you could show off a piece of garbage to women who don't even like you. That was when Chloe finally looked past his shoulder. That was when she saw me standing in the doorway. I was wearing my plain charcoal suit. I was holding my old, unbranded leather handbag. I did not say a single word. I just looked at her with the exact same calm, observing expression I had worn at her disastrous dinner party. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She remembered the solarium. She remembered Marcus packing her fake bag into a federal evidence pouch. She remembered me telling her that she had built her own trap and locked the door from the inside. She knew, in that exact moment, that I had told David everything. The panic in her eyes instantly warped into pure, unadulterated venom. She could not accept the blame. People like Chloe never do. If they accept the blame, their entire fragile ego shatters. They have to find an enemy. You, Chloe shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. You did this. You planned this from the very beginning. You hated me from the day David married me. And you used your little syndicate friends to destroy our lives. She lunged forward, not to attack me, but to grab David's arm, trying desperately to pull him back to her side. David? Don't you see? She cried, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. Your mother set us up. She could have warned us. She could have given us the money to fix it. But she wanted me to fail. She is the reason we are bankrupt. David looked down at her hand, gripping his sleeve. He did not try to pull away. He simply reached over, peeled her fingers off his arm, one by one, and let her hand drop to her side. My mother didn't forge my signature to access the commercial accounts. Chloe, David said. His voice was completely steady now. The last thread of his patience had snapped, and all that was left was cold, hard truth. My mother didn't wire $25,000 to a criminal shell company. You did that. You dug this hole, and you dragged me down into it with you. He walked past her, ignoring her completely, and pulled a small duffel bag out of the closet. He started throwing his clothes into it. Just the essentials. Just enough to get out. David. What are you doing? Chloe panicked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. You can't leave me here. We have to figure this out. We have to call my parents. Maybe they can give us a loan. Your parents can't save you from a federal subpoena. Chloe, David said, zipping the duffel bag shut with a sharp, final sound. I am leaving. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. And if the FBI comes knocking on this door tomorrow morning asking about the Vanguard network, I highly suggest you tell them the truth. He slung the bag over his shoulder, walked past her, and stepped into the hallway next to me. He did not look back. Chloe collapsed onto the edge of the mattress. She was completely alone in a massive, expensive house she could not afford, wearing fake diamonds, waiting for the federal marshals to come back and finish the job. I turned around and followed my son down the stairs. We left the front door unlocked. There was absolutely nothing of value left inside anyway. I drove my son back to my small house in absolute silence. The bitter winter wind was howling outside the car windows. But inside the cabin, there was a strange, heavy peace. It was the kind of peace that only comes after a massive storm has finally broken. David did not say a word. The entire drive, he just stared out the passenger window, watching the streetlights blur past. When we got to my house, I made up the bed in the guest room. I gave him a clean towel and told him to get some sleep. He lay down in his clothes and slept for 14 solid hours. It was the deep, dreamless sleep of a man who no longer had to wake up and pretend everything was perfectly fine. The crushing, suffocating weight of maintaining Chloe's fake reality had finally been lifted off his shoulders. He had lost almost everything. But for the first time in 5 years, he was actually free. While David slept, the federal government went to work. At exactly 8 o'clock on Thursday morning, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Marcus. He was calling from a secure line to give me an update on the Vanguard operation. He told me that 2 federal agents had knocked on Chloe's front door right after sunrise. They were not there to confiscate another bag. They were there to serve her with a formal subpoena to appear before a grand jury. They needed her to testify about the exact nature of the $25,000 wire transfer she had authorized to the Cypriot shell company. Marcus said Chloe was completely hysterical. She tried to use her usual tactics. She cried. She played the victim. She tried to tell the federal agents that she was just a naive housewife who had been tricked by a personal shopper on the internet. But the FBI does not care about your tears. And they certainly do not care about your social status. They care about paper trails. And Chloe's paper trail was a straight, undeniable line from her husband's commercial operating account directly into the hands of an international money laundering syndicate. She begged the agents to unfreeze her personal checking account. She told them she needed to buy groceries. She told them she needed to put gas in her car. The agents calmly informed her that every single dollar in her name was currently classified as the fruit of a fraudulent transaction. They told her the freeze would remain in place for the duration of the investigation, which could take anywhere from 6 to 18 months. She was legally broke. Instantly. Entirely. And completely broke. By Thursday afternoon, David finally woke up. He walked into my kitchen, poured himself a cup of black coffee, and sat down at the table. He looked older. The boyish desperation I had seen in his eyes the day before was gone. It had burned away overnight, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. He did not ask me to fix it. He did not ask for a loan to try and salvage the logistics company. He knew the business was already dead. The federal freeze on his operating accounts meant his payroll was going to bounce the very next morning. His contracts were going to be voided. His trucks were going to sit idle in the lot. Chloe had killed his company the moment she clicked send on that wire transfer. David spent the next 3 hours on the phone. He did not call Chloe. He called a corporate bankruptcy attorney. He called a divorce lawyer. And then he made the hardest calls of his life. He personally called every single one of his drivers and his vendors. He did not make excuses. He did not blame a technical glitch. He told them the absolute truth. He told them his accounts had been frozen due to an internal financial compromise. and he was officially filing for corporate bankruptcy. It was agonizing to listen to him systematically dismantle the dream he had spent 8 years building. But as a mother, I had never been more proud of him. He was taking responsibility. He was facing the consequences head-on, with complete dignity. He was finally acting like a man who owned his life, instead of a hostage in his own home. Meanwhile, Chloe was discovering exactly what happens when a fake life runs out of funding. She could not hire a defense attorney because she had no access to cash, and no law firm was going to take a client whose assets were locked in a federal fraud case. She tried to call her parents, begging them for a loan to cover her legal fees and her massive credit card bills. But her parents were middle-class retirees. When they heard the words federal indictment and money laundering, they panicked. They told her they could not afford to get dragged into a criminal investigation and refused to send her a single dime. She tried to reach out to the women from the country club, the women she had spent years trying to impress. She sent frantic text messages to the billionaire's wife, pleading for a character reference or a temporary loan. The messages were left unread. In the world of high society, a financial scandal is a fatal disease, and nobody was going to risk catching it by associating with her. By Friday evening, the reality of her isolation was absolute. She was sitting alone in a massive, freezing house. She could not turn on the central heating because the utility companies had tried to run their automatic payments on her frozen accounts, and the payments had bounced. The house was plunging into the bitter winter temperatures. I know this because David's divorce attorney received a frantic, screaming voicemail from Chloe on Friday night. She was demanding that David come back to the house and pay the electric bill. She was demanding that he fix the mess she had created. David just listened to the voicemail on speakerphone in my living room. He did not flinch. He did not look sad. He just looked incredibly tired. He told his lawyer to draft a standard response, stating that all communication must now go through legal channels, and he permanently blocked her number from his phone. The dominoes had not just fallen. They had completely pulverized the fake plastic world Chloe had tried to build. She had sacrificed her marriage, her husband's livelihood, and her own freedom for a piece of cheap polyurethane that was currently sitting in a federal evidence locker. She had absolutely nothing left to hide behind. The final reckoning had arrived, and there was only one thing left for me to do before I closed this chapter of my life forever. 3 months have passed since the night David walked out of that blindingly bright, echoing house. The bitter winter snow has finally melted away, leaving behind a very quiet, very warm spring in our town. The storm is completely over. The dust has settled, and the landscape of our family looks entirely different now. David's divorce was finalized a few weeks ago. It was a remarkably fast process, mostly because there were absolutely no assets left to fight over. The federal government and the bankruptcy courts had already stripped the carcass completely bare. It was a brutal few months for my son. He had to stand in front of a bankruptcy judge and systematically dismantle the company he had poured 8 years of his life into. He had to hand over the keys to his warehouse. He had to watch his leased delivery trucks get repossessed one by one. But he did not break. For the first time in a very long time, he was not carrying the suffocating weight of his wife's impossible expectations. I saw him yesterday for lunch. He is working as a regional route manager for a different logistics firm now. He does not own the company. He does not wear custom-tailored suits. He drives a 5-year-old sedan with a small dent in the rear bumper. But when he sat across from me in that diner, ordering a regular cup of black coffee, he looked 10 years younger. The dark, heavy circles under his eyes were completely gone. He was breathing easily. He had lost his business, but he had finally gotten his life back. As for Chloe, the federal grand jury ultimately decided not to indict her for criminal racketeering. After reviewing the communication logs, the FBI realized she was not a mastermind in an international money laundering syndicate. She was just a remarkably arrogant, deeply insecure woman who had been easily conned by professional criminals. But escaping prison did not mean she escaped the consequences. The asset forfeiture was permanent. The $25,000 she wired to Vanguard was seized by the federal government and is never coming back. Because the commercial credit lines were frozen and David filed for bankruptcy, the bank immediately foreclosed on their massive showcase of a house. Chloe had nowhere to go. Her wealthy friends from the Oak Ridge Country Club had completely ghosted her. Her parents refused to let her move back into their retirement condo. She ended up renting a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the far edge of the county. Living entirely on the meager wages of a part-time retail job she was forced to take just to keep the lights on. But the absolute most poetic part of her downfall happened just last month. David's lawyer told me the story. Desperate for cash to pay off her mounting personal credit card debt, Chloe gathered up her massive collection of designer shoes, belts, and handbags, the ones she had spent years flaunting. She dragged 3 heavy suitcases into a high-end luxury consignment shop downtown, expecting to walk out with thousands of dollars in cash. The appraiser at the shop put on a pair of white cotton gloves, set his magnifying glass down, and went through her collection piece by piece out of 40 items. He accepted exactly 4. He politely informed her that the rest of her collection was entirely counterfeit. She had been buying gray market fakes for years, paying premium prices for absolute garbage. Just to maintain the illusion of a wealth she never actually possessed, she had to drag those heavy suitcases right back out to her rusted car, completely humiliated by a stranger holding a magnifying glass. I did not feel sorry for her. I did not feel guilty. I just felt a profound sense of closure. I am sitting on my back porch right now. The morning sun is warm against my face. I am drinking Earl Grey tea from a simple, handcrafted ceramic mug. It does not have a logo on it. It does not prove my worth to anyone who walks by. It just holds my tea perfectly. My old, unbranded leather handbag is resting on the chair next to me. The leather soft and worn from decades of quiet, reliable use. I spent 25 years of my life examining the seams of counterfeit luxury. I learned that you can replicate the shine of gold. You can mimic the texture of leather. And you can forge a certificate of authenticity, but you can never fake the structural integrity of the real thing. Eventually, the cheap glue always melts. The zinc hardware always tarnishes. The truth always rises to the surface. In the end, Chloe learned the hardest lesson of all. Fake luxury can absolutely empty your bank account. But it is a fake character that truly bankrupts your life. Thank you for spending this time with me, and for letting me share this chapter of my life. If you believe that true respect is earned through honesty, not bought with a credit card, please hit the subscribe button and like this video. There are plenty of other stories waiting for you right here.